like, tell us how, like, who's the murderer. And so then he informed them that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like, has ordered them to slaughter a cow and to take the body part of the cow and strike it with the deceased. Allah would bring him back to life, and he would inform them who had killed him. Right? فَضَرَبُوهُ بِبَعْضِهَا كَذَلِكَ يُحْيِي اللَّهُ الْمَوْتَى وَيُرِيكُمْ آيَاتِهِ. Right? So strike one with the other, and this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will show them that resurrection happens. So if this, like, that's essentially what the story. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, as I mentioned, right? وَإِذْ قَتَلْتُمْ نَفْسًا فَادَّارَأْتُمْ فِيهَا. And so, like, and recall when you slaughtered a man, right? Slaughtered a person, and then you disputed over it. So dara'tum fiha in the Arabic language, which means that you, it has a tadaru, which means tadafa', right? That you disputed with one another, you pushed one another. But what it meant was that in this case, it almost resulted into a huge fitna between the tribes of Bani Israel, because each one of them is accusing the other. So almost erupted into a bit of a civil war among them, and so it was a huge fitna, and this is perhaps why they came to Prophet Musa alayhi salam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like is saying, Wallahu mukhrijum ma kuntum taktumun. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring out what you are concealing, because the murderer had concealed himself. And maybe perhaps there's his tribe members might know him, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will show what happened. We ordered them to strike, which means the slain man, with a part of the cow. كَذَلِكَ يُحْيِي اللَّهُ الْمَوْتَى. This is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings death to life. وَيُرِيكُمْ آيَاتِهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ. And He shows you His signs that you might reason, contemplate, comprehend. And so when they came to Musa alayhi salam, right, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed to Musa what to do. And so Musa, he said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُكُمْ أَن تَذْبَحُوا بَقَرَةً. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ordering you to slaughter a cow. You notice he didn't attribute the order to himself. He didn't say, slaughter a cow. He said, Allah is ordering you to slaughter a cow. Right? Even though it shouldn't make a difference, because an order from a prophet is an order from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So why did Musa alayhi salam choose that wording? Why did he say Allah has ordered you? He could have said, just slaughter a cow and do this. Interesting. So they question Musa and they won't question Allah. That's a good one, right? No, it's a good point. And so perhaps maybe this is why Musa did this, so that he, as they say, in Arabic, لِيُعَظِّمَ أَمْرَ اللَّهِ فِي نُفُوسِهِمْ, right? So he would, glorify and magnify the matter of Allah in their hearts. That this is an order from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُكُمْ أَن تَذْبَحُوا بَقَرَةً. And so he attributed to order to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so that they don't argue about it. So they wouldn't argue about it. But what did they do? They said, قَالُوا أَتَتَّخُذُنَا هُزُوًا. They said, are you taking us in ridicule? Are you making fun of us? What does slaughtering a cow have to do with the finding the dead person? Are you joking? But do you see that line of argument in itself? It harbors within it very ill-mannered, right? A negative opinion of the Prophet. They hold the status of a prophet not in an esteemed status, right? And so they're asking, are you making fun of us? Are you scoffing us? Are you ridiculing us? Or why we're telling you this? What has to do with this cow? And so, this is just to point out their view of how they do certain things, right? So, for them, they have no problem with thinking that a prophet would sink low to ridicule others. Now, ridiculing others is not exactly the best of highest of manners and behaviors. When you start making fun of people, the prophets, they're not like that. They're the highest levels of, character, the highest level of behavior. But they have no problem of attributing this to a prophet, which means that they don't hold the status of prophethood at a high esteemed status as they should. We know that the prophets are ma'sumun, they are protected from not just from doing wrong things, but from the lowly forms of behaviors, right? The insignificant things that are not important or that they would bring a person like, nobility down. The prophets are protected of that. But like, this is something that they thought about. And so we're not shocked when when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells them that you killed prophets. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called them the killers or murderers of prophets. Then we're not surprised, right? If this is how they think about prophets. Now, when they said, are you ridiculing us? He said, أعوذ بالله أن أكون من الجاهلين. So he said, I seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I be among the ignorant. He didn't say, I seek refuge in Allah that I be among those that ridicule you. No, he said from the ignorant. And the reason behind it is because that whole action of ridiculing and making fun of others is not from the acts of those who are intelligent or wise, like the prophets. This is the action of the ignorant individuals. And so this is perhaps, we can take a lesson from this, is that when we get an order from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or His Prophet, our initial behavior or our default setting continuously should be that we submit to the order of Allah and His Messenger. To submit to the order of Allah. Because if you look over here, Bani Israel, did they submit to the order? No, they didn't. Right? They accused the Prophet, making fun of us, rather than submit. And this is really important, especially that we live in a time that deifies the mind. Right? We live in a time that the brain is deified. Right? It becomes the God that dictates what's right and what is wrong. If it doesn't make sense to us, why are we going to do it? Okay? And unfortunately, this happens among some of the Muslims, whether youth or older individuals. They believe that their mind is at a level enough that they could judge the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is very hypocritical, right? That is very egotistic, in a sense. When you believe that your intellect should be the scale where you judge Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And so in this case, what happens is people will start asking things such as, and they also measure things to their environment. And this didn't just happen, did happen in Muslim countries. So for example, whether it is Algeria or Morocco, among the people themselves, and unfortunately many of them actually have, this comes from people who are, they're Muslims, they're very secular minded, and they argue about the inheritance, right? Why is it that the inheritance is done the way it is? It's not just 50-50 among every male and female. Why in certain categories, when the male and the female are in the same class, that the male would get, a larger amount? Why is that, right? It is not fair. We're not going to accept it. So what did they just do over here? They rejected the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? They're accusing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether they like it or not, within, within their claim, it harbors within it that they're claiming that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not wise. How is that different than Bani Israel? Right? It is not. So this is a lesson for us not to fall into that trap, but rather we submit to the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We submit to the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if at that moment we may not understand why. Because the reality is we will not comprehend Allah's wisdom. We might find things in the future, right? We might understand it better in the future, but not necessarily now. We have to understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's order are associated with His attributes, that it's based on His knowledge and His wisdom subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that whatever He ordered us to do is beneficial for us, whether in the short term or long term, in this world or the hereafter. And what He had prohibited us from, told us not to do it, then it's definitely bad for us, whether in the short term or long term, in this world or the hereafter. Right? That's that's hand down. And sometimes, subhanAllah, certain things we don't realize until people fiddle around with it, and we see the effect of it 3 generations later on. But then it's too late to change it back again. It is too late, right? We live in a modern age where almost every aspect, that defies for example, the family construct, the family, way of, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had organized the family system. If you look at it in the modern society that we live in, it broke every aspect of it. What is the end result? The end result is a fragmented society. Like, families are not whole, right? And it just starts with those little changes that we think that it's okay. We're in the modern time. This is how it's supposed to be. But those have a long psychological and emotional effect on us, that it resulted in the dismantling of the family unit. And if you dismantle the family unit, you fragment the society. There is no more society, right? There is no healthy society. Right? And so this is the first message, is that we should submit to the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not walk in the footsteps of Bani Israel, that we would go astray by accusing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of not being wise. Like, why should we follow this? And so he said, أعوذ بالله أن أكون من الجاهلين. I seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be from the ignorant, and I have that quality or attribute. And so this also tells us that any time we start making fun of anything, that this is the behavior of the ignorant. Because anything you make fun of, why are you making fun of it? Either one, you think you're better, right? You think you're better, so you're making fun of. But also making fun of, is that person that you're making fun of for whatever they have, is it because Allah made them that way? Is it something out of their control? And so what are you really making fun of? Right? And so that's the quality, the attribute of the Jahilin. طيب. And so now it's clear to now when Musa alayhi salam responded this way, it became clear to Bani Israel that this is something that is actually an order, right? So did they submit? No. Even though you have to understand, like it should come to no surprise, right? Like, they should not underestimate, or they should have known the real status of Musa alayhi salam when he's ordered them to do something, that this is what is beneficial. After all, they've experienced so much with Musa alayhi salam, right? Musa alayhi salam was the one that he had saved them. He's the one that directed them. He's the one that, miracles have, occurred by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon his hands. He's the one that, crossed and saved them from Fir'aun. He's the one that crossed the river with them. There's so many things that prove that Musa alayhi salam should be in a status that they would honor and take every order very seriously, right? So after all of that, right, what should you think about Musa alayhi salam? And so nonetheless, they didn't just say, okay, right, we will do it. They said, قالوا ادع لنا ربك يبين لنا ما هي, right? Make dua, right? ادع لنا ربك, call upon your Lord to make it clear to us, what is it? So what was the order? To slaughter a what? Slaughter a what? A cow. A cow. Does it matter what kind of cow? No. Right? Just go slaughter a cow, buy one and slaughter it, and strike the body part of this one with the dead, and that's it. But when they had refused and they asked more question, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it harder for them. He made it more difficult for them, right? And one would ask, why did they do that? Why not just obey right away? And maybe perhaps it's because they were, in Arabic it's called mumatala, right? Mumatala is like a delay, like a procrastination form, because you don't really want to do it, right? You just, you're like, go do this. All right, which one? The one over there. The one on the right or the one on the left? Right? It happens with kids a lot, if you have kids. Is that right, Sheikh? So it is true. It is true, but it also once again reflects the type. We have to also just mention that they're believers. They do believe. These are Muslimin. But it's, subhanAllah, it's their attitude, right? It's their attitude. Ud'u lana rabbak. No, that's true, but it almost sounds like that. But it's not. Because if they didn't believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why would He order them to do whatever the case is, right? But no, they were Muslims. but obviously not the best of Muslims, right? Not the best of Muslims. And so there is a behavior of, like, belittling, a behavior of ill manner, right? Not just towards the Prophet, but towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But also if you have that towards the Prophet, it is towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so they did that. They said, "Ud'u lana rabbak yubayyin lana ma hi," right? And so perhaps this is a second lesson we can learn, right? The second lesson we can learn from Bani Israel is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders something or His Messenger, then we should do it immediately without any sort of argument, right? You don't argue with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In what position do we have to argue with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And we do it immediately without procrastination, without any sort of slowing down. And that's something that's imperative because it shows that we respect the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And sometimes even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with His mercy, He gives us some time to perform certain things and orders, that's from His mercy, because without that we might have fallen some difficulty. It doesn't mean that we should delay it, but doing it hastily and quickly reflects the level of how much we honor the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how much we love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is why, for example, one of the most beloved deeds to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is praying prayers on its time, beginning part of the time, right? When the adhan comes in, especially dhuhr time, for example, right? Adhan comes in almost at 1 o'clock, 12:50 something, and asr, even the earliest, in the majority of scholars, asr is 4:50. So it's almost 3 hours, almost 4 hours, we'll say, right? Almost 4 hours. A lot of people, when do they pray it? Huh? 3:30, right? 3:45. They push it, right? Yes, we have that leeway. It's understandable. But when we hear the call, the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to worship in this now, when our heart drives us to do it as quick as possible, as soon as possible, that is important, right? That is very important for us, that we should strive to do the best that we can to do things immediately and quickly. All right, now one thing so once again, without argumentation. Now the other thing I wanted to mention, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordered them, He said, they said, clarify to us what it is. If these qualities or characteristics or description of the Baqarah would be necessary, wouldn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describe it? Yeah, right? So when Allah did not describe it, does that mean it's important? It's not necessary. It has nothing to do with the miracle that was intended to happen. Right? It's not associated with it, right? And so it would have been done for and it's over if they just did it. But they asked the question, right? Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had told us this. He warned us about this behavior, right? And he told us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala remained silent. وَسَكَتَ عَنْ أَشْيَاء لَمْ يُبْدِهَا لَكُمْ رَحْمَةً مِنْهُ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He ordered to do certain things, He didn't clarify certain things out of mercy for us, not out of forgetfulness. فَلَا تَبْحَثُ عَنْهَا. Don't search for it. Don't look for the details. Because if you do that, what's going to happen? Things will be a bit more difficult. A restriction happens. Especially this is when it came and had to do with the order that came. So when the Prophet ﷺ would order to do something, I'll give you an example. When the Prophet ﷺ had ordered the people to perform Hajj, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُكُمْ أَن تَحُجُّوا, perform Hajj, right? A person said, every year. If it was intended every year, wouldn't the Prophet ﷺ clarify it? Yes? The Prophet ﷺ ignored it. The person asked again. And so the Prophet ﷺ said, لَوْ قُلْتُ نَعَمْ لَوَجَبَتْ. The Prophet ﷺ said, if I said yes, it would have been, this is what you're going to have to do. Don't ask. The order came down, fulfill it. Right? So this is specifically important during the wahy of time of revelation. Because we have to be rest assured that everything that has to do with religion, the orders associated with it has been clarified to the level it needs to be clarified with. And that's it. Right? You perform it without making things more difficult for ourselves. Wallahu a'lam. Tayyib. And so Musa alayhi salam, he told them, right, after they asked the question, said, قَالَ إنه يقول إنها بقرة لا فارض ولا بكر عوان بين ذلك فافعلوا ما تؤمرون. So he said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, and he described now because he wanted a description of the cow. He said, إنها بقرة لا فارض ولا بكر عوان بين ذلك. He gave them, started with the age, right? He told them that it's a cow that is neither old, neither young, right? That, that is so young that it hasn't even mated yet, right? So it's neither old, neither that is so young that has mated. It is between those two, right? And then he told them, فَفَعَلُوا مَا تُؤْمَرُونَ. Do what you're commanded, right? Which means don't ask any more, just do it, right? This is enough, and it's almost as if Musa knows his people, right? Musa knows his people how they are, and so he's trying to hint, that's it, the end of it, just do it. فَفَعَلُوا مَا تُؤْمَرُونَ. Do what you're ordered. But did they do it? All right, so there's now the second time, right? So the first time, the second time, he said, قَالُوا ادْعُ لَنَا رَبَّكَ يُبَيِّنْ لَنَا مَا هِيَ قُولُوا ادْعُ رَبَّنَا يُبَيِّنْ لَنَا مَا لَوْنُهَا. Right? Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, tell us what is its color. So does that matter really? Is the color important? You said an age, but here's the interesting thing, right? So there's so what does the color have to do with obeying the order? First of all, nothing, right? The color has nothing, the age has nothing, but they kept doing it. But one thing we have to understand is that the more qualifications there are, the more details they are, the more difficult for you to find what you're looking for. Right? And so now they ask about the color, even though they could have remained silent and not asked about it, but they asked about the color. But what I want to point out is how Musa alayhi salam was responding to all this. Right? He kept answering them. Right? Now this is perhaps the third lesson, is that when we are in a position, when we're calling others to Islam, when we're dealing or raising children, that we have to be patient upon those that we're teaching. Musa alayhi salam was patient with them, very patient. Right? And so Musa alayhi salam was extremely patient with them. And so this, when we're teaching the young people, teaching individuals, especially about Islam, we should be extremely patient, even if they are wrong, even if they are being stubborn about it, because it is going to probably be better for them. We can come down to their level, right? We can come down to their level so that we can deliver that message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so Musa alayhi salam told them, إنه يقول إنها بقرة صفراء فاقع لونها تسر الناظرين. He said it's a cow that is yellow, not just yellow, bright yellow, that pleases the observer. Okay? So now, age, and then the color. Okay? And so, once again, it's becoming a bit more difficult, right? It's not just any yellow color now, but it's a color of yellow that pleases the person that looks at it. Right? I have no idea with the psychology of colors, but it seemed that there's at least in the modern time, yellow seems to be like a comforting color, right? Apparently. Wallah, this is of course from the wisdom of Allah. So he said, the surul nadhirin, pleases the one who looks at it. Shaykh, it seemed like you were going to ask a question. Now it has to be a specific cow.
So in the beginning, you cannot just slaughter any cow.
No, you can. Inna Allah ya'murukum. No. With every stubbornness comes more difficulty. In the beginning, he said, Inna Allah ya'murukum tadbahu baqara. They said, they came to Musa, help us with this murder. He said, Inna Allah ya'murukum tadbahu baqara. And they said, okay, tell us what it is. They asked, and so Allah revealed the restriction. And then they asked again. Now it's a second restriction, right? Initially, this is the Shaykh, the iqab. It's a punishment.
Yeah, but in the end, we know that it's a special baqarah.
I know. In the end, but the whole thing we have to understand is what got it to that point. Now remember, these stories is that we need to learn the lessons from it. Right? They made it difficult for them lives. They made it difficult, right? And we need to learn from that. But anyway, even after the color, right? They said, قالوا ادع لنا ربك يبين لنا ما هي إن البقرة تشابه علينا. Right? They said, call upon your Lord to make it clear to us, because indeed the cows, they look alike to us. They look alike, right? Anyway, all right. Now it looks alike. What about before, right? Anyway, so, but however, what they did is we said, وَإِنَّا إِنْ شَاءَ اللَّهِ لَمُهْتَدُونَ. Right? They said, indeed we, if Allah wills, will be guided. Now, previously, did they say that? They didn't. Right? Once they said that, subhanallah, they were guided, even though it was a bit more restriction. Right? And this perhaps is like, a fourth lesson, is that when we want to do anything, we have to always say, remember to say, Insha Allah. Right? And we did when we were studying Surah Al-Kahf. Remember when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told the Prophet وَلَا تَقُولَنَّ لِشَيْءٍ إِنِّي فَعَلٌ ذَلِكَ غَدًا إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ. Don't say that I will do something tomorrow except that you say, Insha Allah, God willing. Right? And subhanallah, the same thing with Ya'juj and Ma'juj. They keep trying to get out of the barrier. Right? They keep trying. But they say, we'll return tomorrow. But they never said inshallah. It's not until they said inshallah that they were able to do it. Right? And so we should always return back everything to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If Allah wills, it would happen. Right? Like, I'll meet you at this time, inshallah. I'll buy you this, inshallah. I'll finish this, inshallah. This is something that is inshallah beneficial that we have to do all the time. طيب. So this is essentially we can learn from, a fourth one. And so once they asked, clarify to us, inshallah we're muhtadun. So this is now the fourth restriction. He said, يقول إنها بقرة لا ذلول تثير الأرض ولا تسقي الحرث مسلمة لا شية فيها. He said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you it's a cow that is neither trained to plow the earth or to irrigate the fields. And then he even said, مُسَلَّمَةٌ لَا شِيَةَ فِيهَا. Musallama, which means it's free of any fault. No defects in it. لَا شِيَةَ فِيهَا, there is no spots upon it. Right? This cow is complete spotless. Right? Yellow, of a specific age, that doesn't plow or doesn't irrigate. It's left to do whatever it wants. So how many can you find of this kind? Right? But once again, this is all their fault. And it was mentioned that they could only find it at an orphan. Now, once again, if something becomes so rare, then it becomes even more expensive. It was said that they did not accept anything less than its weight in gold. Right? Its weight in gold. Wallahu a'lam. طيب. Now, once this happened, they said, قالوا الآن جئت بالحق. Right? Now you have come with the clear truth. It's as if Musa was what was he doing before? Right? What were the previous orders from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Now you have to remember, Musa alayhi salam is ordering he's ordered by Allah. Now if they say this to Musa, then what are they saying about Allah? Right? They say now he came with the truth, as if Musa was not serious before. He was playing games with them. No. طيب. Now, once again, I know it sounds surprising. It doesn't sound like these are believing people, but the reality is those were the Muslims at that time, right?
Does that mean they know that what kind of bakar was it?
Well, they found it eventually. Well, they found it after all those restrictions, right? But if they had obeyed it the first time, then it would have been any cow, right? And even after the second restriction, it would have been easier because it's an age. Because there's many of them that's going to be of that age. Now, after the third restriction, it's not that age, but it has to be a specific color. After that, not just that, but it's how it's being treated. So if you notice, it's you're going from a wider base to a very narrower base because of all the restrictions. طيب. Now, in the end, it said, فَذَبَحُوهَا وَمَا كَادُوا يَفْعَلُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said they slaughtered it, right? And they almost did not. Because they didn't want to do it. They didn't want to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, this also like something also we can deduce a lesson from that. Sometimes when we don't want to do any something, we'll try to find what we disguise as legitimate excuse. Right? We should never do that. This is we're tricking ourselves, right? We're saying, well, I can't do it because of this. Well, is this a legitimate reason? Right? No, it's not. It's not a legitimate reason, right? But we try to disguise it and make excuses. And the funny thing about an excuse is that in our mind, it's always valid, right? But what really a valid excuse is what Allah had considered valid, right? Not what we put as valid. And so we should not behave like that. And so then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the end mentions the story of going back, and we talked about this with قَتَلْتُمْ نَفْسًا فَادَّارَأْتُمْ فِيهَا فَقُلْنَا ضْرِبُوهُ بَعْضِهَا كَذَلِكَ يُحْيِي اللَّهُ الْمَوْتَ وَيُرِيكُمْ آيَاتِهِ. And so he mentioned the person that he died, and we ordered them to strike the body part of the dead with the cow, and then he got resurrected. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing them this is how we resurrect. كَذَلِكَ يُحْيِي اللَّهُ وَيُرِيكُمْ آيَاتِهِ shows you a sign that you might be of intellect. But then comes several interesting verses, right, after that. So essentially this is a miracle, right? This is a miracle that happened in front of them again. It's not the first time. Now this miracle, even the inanimate objects would melt because of it. Now inanimate objects are aware of the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described them as what? ثُمَّ قَسَتْ قُلُوبُكُم مِّن بَعْدِ ذَلِكَ فَهِيَ كَالْحِجَارَةِ أَوْ أَشَدُّ قَسْوَةً. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that their hearts, after that, it hardened. ثُمَّ قَسَتْ قُلُوبُكُم مِّن بَعْدِ ذَلِكَ. Like even after this miracle, their hearts hardened. فَهِيَ كَالْحِجَارَةِ أَوْ أَشَدُّ قَسْوَةً. It's like the stone, but even harder. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions how stones, وَإِنَّ مِنْ حِجَارَةٍ لَمَا يَفَجَّرُ مِنْهُ الْأَنْهَارُ. And even it's worse than stones. Even though some stones, out of it there is rivers that explode, or that it breaks because of of water. Like over time, when water drops on it, it breaks. So even stone can break. But it seemed that the hearts of Bani Israel were even worse than, or stronger than, harder than stones. Right? And so this is another message for us, that we always have to be careful. The constant disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the constant resistance to the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can result into the hardening of the heart. If our heart hardens, right, then the iman in it is not as strong as it should be. The level of submission doesn't happen. And then we become more distant from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The effect of Quran upon our hearts become less effective. It requires a lot more work. And then once that happens, then we realize that acts of worship become more difficult for us. And so this is a lesson for us. We have to make sure that we stay away from things that would result in hardening our hearts. That we should make sure that we pay attention to our hearts, that we do the things that would soften constantly, so that we be able to continue to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So that we would not fall into that trap. The softer our heart is, the more likely we are to obey and submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The harder our hearts are, the more likely we will not obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so this is a message that we can learn from that. طيب. So this now brings us to the second story of Bani Israel over here, at the time of Musa alayhi salam. And we're not going to finish the entire story. We're going to divide them over 2 days, inshallah. But this has to do with, Musa alayhi salam, another story that's mentioned, which is in Surah Al-Kahf, that entire story of Musa alayhi salam with Al-Khadr. Right? The story of Musa alayhi salam with Al-Khadr. And once again, this was still in the time where Bani Israel were still lost in Sinai. And it happened when Musa alayhi salam was giving an admonition, like a reminder to Bani Israel. Right? He was giving them a reminder to soften their hearts, to order them to have taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so after he had done this, one person asked Musa alayhi salam, he asked him, are you the most knowledgeable person in this world? أنت أعلم أهل الأرض. Are you the most knowledgeable of the people of this earth? And so Musa alayhi salam said, yes. Right. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blamed him for making that statement and not returning it back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not saying Allahu A'lam. Even though in reality, by the way, Musa alayhi salam is from the the messengers of resolve, the elite messengers, ulil azm, right? The messengers of resolve. He's one of the 5 ones, and at that time, there's no better messenger than him. There isn't, right? But still, in this case, you should always return that knowledge to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because we never know. Right? And so Musa, even though, by the way, Musa, he made this is a form of ijtihad. This is a form of exerting effort and opinion, and he made that statement. So it's not a sin. We have to understand this is what Musa alayhi salam, this statement was not a sin. Right? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us that no matter how much knowledge we have, we should always say, Allahu A'lam. Because there might be somebody who definitely does exist that might have, at least in some aspect, more knowledge than us. And so this is where the entire story starts, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to Musa, He said, Ya Musa, I have a servant of mine that has more knowledge. Not more knowledge overall, but knowledge that he possesses that you do not possess. And so Musa alayhi salam, what he wanted to do is, to seek that knowledge. Right? He wanted to seek that knowledge, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordered him to travel. But how can you find that individual? Right? How are you going to find, he told him who he was, or he not necessarily has told him who he was, but he had, told him he exists. And so Musa alayhi salam wanted to go see him, and he didn't know how to get there. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had instructed him what to do. Right? He instructed him to take a fish and put it in a container, and he told him the place that you lose, right, Majma' al-Bahrain, you're going to find him in Majma' al-Bahrain, which means the joinement of the 2 bodies of water. This is where you're going to find, but there's a lot of places where this happens, the meeting of the 2 bodies of water. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him, the place that you lose that fish is where you're going to find him. Right? The place that you lose the fish is where you're going to find him. And so over here, one thing we need, there's a lesson over here. Musa obviously is the most knowledgeable at that time. And he's a messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and one of the elite messengers. Al-Khadr, of course, there's a argument and dispute whether he is a messenger also, or whether he is just a righteous individual. Wallahu a'lam, it's more likely that he's a messenger, because a lot of evidence are inclined to that. But even if he's a messenger, he's not as a high status as Musa alayhi salam. But then still Musa alayhi salam, he humbled himself and he went to seek knowledge from Al-Khadr. And so one lesson we can come from over here is to tawadu', which is humility, right? No matter what status we reach, position we reach, how much knowledge we have, we should always be humble and have humility, and to be ready to even learn from those who might be younger than us, or those who might be in less than status than us. Many of the scholars, you see this in many of the lifetime of the scholars, or even some of the lifetime of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. Right? Many of the great Sahaba, such as Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, for example, or Umar ibn Khattab, he would seek knowledge or information of people that were considered of a less status in Sahaba than them, because they had a specific knowledge. Many of the scholars of Hadith, for example, they would teach their students, and sometimes their students might be very specialized in a specific thing. They would sit them in their place and learn from them. Right? And so it's said you will never completely learn, until you're ready to humble yourself to learn from those who are in less in status from you. Status means whether it's age or position or whatever the case is. Right? We should always be ready to this, because nobody ever in this world has complete knowledge of everything. There will always be individuals that might be special in a specific field that can teach you certain things about it, and so we can humble ourselves. So this is one thing we can learn from that. Right? Now Musa alayhi salam, he took a fata with him, a person that happens to be Yusha ibn Nun, right? And if you were with us in Surah Al-Kahf, we mentioned this before. So he took Yusha ibn Nun, who later on was going to become a prophet after Musa alayhi salam. And it is said that Yusha ibn Nun is one of those individuals that was raised in that period of 40 years. It's one of those youth that Musa alayhi salam was focused on to teach them, and so that they would take the reins and carry the mantle after that generation is gone, right? So that they be the worthy generation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give them victory. And so Yusha ibn Nun was one of those, one of those individuals. And so perhaps Prophet Musa alayhi salam had taken with him so that he would continue to teach him on that journey. And when he took him, he actually instructed him. He said, you only have one job, right? His only one job is to tell Musa alayhi salam once they lose that fish. Is that a hard job? Is it hard? It's not a difficult job, right? And so, of course, he went with him and so forth. And so they placed it and they crossed, the desert of Sinai, and they were headed towards the direction of Palestine. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to free it from the occupiers and to return it back to, its native people, to Islam, inshallah. طيب. Now, one thing I want to point out, Musa alayhi salam overall journeyed, and he learned how many things? How many things did he learn? Come on, we read Surah Al-Kahf. Sheikh. 3 stories. 3 things he learned. Right? This entire journey, right, was to learn 3 stories. And this is not something that is unique, by the way. Right? Of course, it is said that Musa alayhi salam was the first person to seek a path to knowledge, to travel to knowledge. It was mentioned that Musa alayhi salam was the first one to do that. But the Sahabas sometimes also did that. One of them had traveled from Medina all the way to Asham because he was seeking a narration that one of the companions was narrating. And then he got it, he turned back and went back home. Right? And so Musa alayhi salam went on this long journey. That was not an easy journey. Right? It was, by all means, it was not anything that was supposed to be easy at all. And so he traveled for a long period of time, and he knew when he was ready to do it. This is why he had told, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَقَالَ مُوسَى لِفَتَاهُ لَا أَبْرَحُ حَتَّى أَبْلَغَ مَجْمَعَ الْبَحْرَيْنِ أَوْ أَمْضِيَ حُقُبًا. Right? He said, I'm not going to stop, right? I'm not going to cease traveling until I reach the junction of the joining of the 2 bodies of water, or continue for long periods of time. So Musa alayhi salam was ready. Didn't matter how long this journey was going to take him. He had intended to acquire knowledge, and he took that path. Right? He strove that path. Now, this tells us that knowledge requires effort and hardship and patience. We never learn anything without it. Truly, we don't. And I know this is almost completely the opposite of our modern day. Right? They tell us attention span is how long? Yeah, Sheikh, attention span. How long? 90 seconds. Right? Attention span is 90 seconds. How much can we learn in 90 seconds? And I don't know if I honestly, I struggle with this data, because throughout history, you see people that go above and beyond that. They would sit for hours and study, or in lectures for hours, and they have no problems and don't get bored. So what changed in our life? Is that statistic for modern times, or do they think that this is throughout history? Right? I think, in my opinion, right, my humble opinion, is that this is more of a modern phenomena that we're experiencing because of what we're exposed to. Right? Our attention span is slowly getting shorter because of what we expose ourselves to. Right? This constant stimulus that is required to grab our attention from one thing to the next. Right? If within a few seconds it doesn't grab our attention, what do? We swipe. Right? If the teacher doesn't give us information in 90 seconds, and there is no class in the world that's 90 seconds. There isn't. I have no idea what you do in a class that's 90 seconds. What can you teach in 90 seconds? But if you notice, the teacher has to be like the teachers have to put on a show now. Right? They have to put on a show. They do this, they walk around, they point to this one, they do these activities. Right? And by the way, I'm not saying that these are bad things. These are very good teaching tools, but it's getting increasingly difficult. We have to understand that the default or the norm is knowledge is acquired through hardship and patience. Right? Those are fundamental to acquire anything. Nobody ever succeeds in anything or acquires anything without patience and hardship. It has to be built. And so Musa alayhi salam went on this journey, and he was patient and he was ready. Right? And he went all the way until he was supposed to reach that junction. فَلَمَّا بَلَغَ مَجْمَعَ بَيْنِهِمَا نَسِيَ حُوتَهُمَا فَاتَّخَذَ سِبِلَهُ فِي الْبَحْرِ saraba. And so when they reached that area where they're supposed to meet Al-Khadr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said they forgot their fish. Right? They forgot their fish, and it took its course into the sea, slipping away. Now it was mentioned in other narrations that either was sleeping and Yusha ibn Nun was kind of like between a state of wakeness and kind of falling asleep. So Prophet Musa alayhi salam fell asleep. He took a nap because they were tired. They took a nap, and so Yusha ibn Nun was sitting there, and he was like between falling asleep and awake. And some of the water, they were sitting close to the shore, some of the water came and it kind of sprinkled on the fish. It got turbulent, it kind of spilled the pail, and then it took its path into the water. Now when it took its path into the water, it's mentioned that there was like a wake in the water. But what's unique is that wake stayed as it is. You guys know what a wake is, right? What's a wake? You know when a boat or a jet ski goes into the water, what does it do? It parts the water, right? There's like this, water that happens, and you see that line of water behind it as it goes. That's called a wake. Now, what usually happens is after a while, what happens? The water goes back to normal. But it was mentioned in the hadith that that wake stayed as it is. It's almost as if it kind of turned into stone, right? Now, of course, when Yusha would see that, this is not something that is normal, right? It's not something that is normal. But he kind of was between awake, and he forgot. And they continued walking, right? فلما جاوزا قال لفتاه آتنا غداءنا لقد لقينا من سفرنا هذا نصبا. And so after they crossed where they're supposed to meet, Musa alayhi salam told Yusha, he said, bring us our breakfast. We are facing hardship from this travel. It's almost as if that everything prior to that, it was not difficult. Right, because they were going towards their target. It was only after they passed their target that they started experiencing real hardship. And so he said, bring us our breakfast. Once this happened, Yusha remembered. He said, he remembered, right? أتينا غداءنا وقد لقينا من سفرنا هذا نصبا. قال أرأيت إذ أوينا إلى الصخرة فإني نسيت الحوت وما أنسانيه إلا الشيطان أن أذكره واتخذ سبيله في البحر عجبا. Right? He said, do you see where we stayed at the rock? I forgot the fish, and what made me forget was the shaitan. And that fish took its path into the ocean, ajaba, in a strange way. Why did he say the shaitan made me forget? Why did he attribute it to the shaitan? Yeah, I'm supposed to remember, right? Now, it's not strange because we have to remember the shaitan will do everything possible to prevent anything that is good. Right? Two prophets coming together is a formidable force. Right? Two prophets coming together is something that is a formidable force. So you coming to gather in the masjid, the shaitan will try to stop it. You coming to seek knowledge, the shaitan will try to stop it. He might make you forget, give you excuses, make you lazy. The shaitan is going to do everything to prevent any sort of goodness for you. Any way possible, right? You never find the shaitan trying to make you lazy from going out to dinner. Actually, it could happen sometimes, but it's not because of the shaitan. Right? But if you're going to go to dinner, if it's between going to the masjid or going to dinner, the shaitan will be like, oh, come on, masjid, go to dinner, or whatever the case is. Anything that has to do with those activities, the shaitan never comes in and tells you, you know what, you had a long day. Don't play PlayStation, right? You had a long day. Don't watch that movie. You had a long day. Don't make that steak. That's not what happens. You had a long day. Rest a few minutes. There's still time for prayers, right? You had a long day. Man, the masjid is like 5 minutes away. You're still going to get in the car and go to the masjid, right? This is what the shaitan is going to do, right? And so this is a second lesson or a third lesson we can learn from this, is to be careful not let the shaitan deceive us from things that will benefit us, right? It will come in the form of either making us forget or making us lazy about it. And so Yusha ibn Nun, he had mentioned, he said, إن الشيطان قد أنسني وما أنسني إلا الشيطان أن أذكره واتخذ سبيله في البحر عجبا. And so Musa alayhi salam said, ذلك ما كنا نبغ. ذلك ما كنا نبغ. This is what we wanted. Like we wanted that fish. فارتدا على آثارهما قصصا. And so they traced back their footsteps. Now Musa alayhi salam, right? Remember, he gave Yusha ibn Nun one job, right? And obviously they traveled for a long distance. It's like, he had to backtrack for a long period of time. Okay? Now, I want you to let's put this in a more modern perspective. Okay? Your child is your co-pilot. Okay? And you're driving. And you're telling him, listen, I have to focus on the road. If you see this sign over here, let me know we need to take this exit. Okay? And then you drove for like 6 hours beyond that exit because they were daydreaming. Actually, better yet, they were on their phone. Okay? They're on their phone and they missed that exit. And you passed it 6 hours later. You're like, where's the exit? And they're like, oh, wait a second. I saw it 6 hours ago. What would you do? Probably throw them out the car, right? While driving, maybe. I'm sure, it's gonna be a mixture with, some sort of yelling and anger and stuff like that. But look at Musa alayhi salam, right? What did he say? He said, that's what we wanted, right? He understood, khalas, something happened from the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Allah had willed this. The shaitan had done something to try to prevent them, right? There's no need to go beyond that. And they slowly traced their footsteps back again. Right? That's what they did. It was as simple as that. Musa alayhi salam showed that, empathy towards in the end, he was still a child. Yusha ibn Nun was a child, and they will make mistakes. Right? Now, of course, this is a reminder for us as parents. I know it's very difficult. We expect perfection from our kids, as if they are they don't make mistakes. Right? We should remember that they will make mistakes. Yes, of course, not every mistake is equal, but to give some leeway to certain mistakes and learn when to put your foot down at specific mistakes, right? But anyway, so they returned back following the steps. So we're going to stop at that description of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had described Al-Khadr, right? He described him, right, with several things that are important in a person, for example, that one must seek knowledge from. Right? He said, فَوَجَدَ عَبْدًا مِنْ عِبَادِنَا. They found a servant of whom we had given mercy from us and had taught him from us a certain knowledge. Okay? So what are those attributes, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He described him as a servant. عَبْدًا مِنْ عِبَادِنَا. That's the first thing. Which means that this person, in his behavior, they submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And then He described him as he has mercy. آتيناه رحمة من عندنا. He is merciful. وعلمناه من لدنا علما. And he has knowledge. Those are three fundamental attributes that if you ever want to seek beneficial knowledge from, that they should have. And we're talking about over here actually religious knowledge that will be beneficial, right? Is that they act upon that knowledge because that's a form of submission, right? And they have mercy in it, and that they actually have knowledge. That they actually have knowledge. Now this kind of in our modern time gets blurred a little bit because we're very good with fluff. I have to call it fluff, right? Fluff is something that you it's all over the place. But is there really knowledge in it? Right? Is there knowledge in it? It's very easy to walk around and kind of repeat some of those things and give something superficial, and people are like, oh, mashallah, this is excellent, this is great, but where's the benefit? Of course, I'm not saying, of course, لكل مقام مقال. For every state, there is a statement, right? For every situation, there is a proper statement. لكل مقام مقال. But to consistently be a matter of, just kind of clouds and fluff and that's it, where is the knowledge that you can attain, practical knowledge? And so you need to seek a person that you're going to learn from that actually possesses that knowledge, that actually practices this knowledge, but also has mercy in their behavior towards delivering. And so these are the three qualities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had described Al-Khadr with, so that Musa alayhi salam wanted to learn from. And Musa alayhi salam went to this conversation and he had that conversation with Al-Khadr alayhi salam. We're going to pick that up inshallah next week. I want to give about 15 minutes inshallah for chai. We have chai, right? We do? Excellent. We'll give 15 minutes inshallah if you guys want to have some food or we'll get ready for prayers. before inshallah Salat Isha. If you have any questions, I can take it now. No, you want to go take chai? خلاص, go take chai. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.